Over 3.5 years since its announcement, we've finally gotten a chance to play Star Wars Outlaws, the first truly open-world Star Wars game made by Ubisoft. So far I've played about 15 hours worth of the game, sticking mostly to the main quests but venturing off occasionally into side quest territory or getting lost in a game of sabacc or two, and I feel like I've had enough experience to put together some initial thoughts on how good the game actually is. Now, I'll preface this by saying that open world games aren't usually my go-to, certainly not the Ubisoft ones at least. So I'm coming at this from the perspective of someone who has limited experience in that genre, but I've played enough video games to know what I like and what I don't like. It certainly feels most games these days get overhyped, and so in the lead up to Outlaws release, I've tried to temper my expectations. The story trailers seemed quite interesting, but a few of the gameplay trailers didn't overly impress me, but they didn't put me off enough either. Pretty much my biggest fear coming into the game was that it would just be a mostly bland, repetitive mess filled with performance issues, and having had the chance to play a good chunk of the game so far, I'd say that those fears are mostly unrealised. Now, I say mostly because there is a repetitive element to the game. Most of the quests tend to follow the same basic formula. You have to retrieve something for a contact, sneak into a place that you're not supposed to be in, avoid a fight if possible, and then steal the requested item and make your escape. And that premise in of itself can be quite interesting if you keep the locations, enemies, and challenges diverse. Outlaws barely achieves this. It seems to be just enough to keep you from getting bored, but not enough to get you massively excited about new missions. And one area that really lets the game down for me is the stealth elements. They can be frustrating and cumbersome given the stiff controls and inconsistent enemy detection, though I will admit that I'm not the biggest fan of stealth sections in general. For me, the frustration with this peaked in moments where you are given no other option than to stealth through a large area without alerting anyone. It seems to be that the game doesn't really give you a lot of help on where to go. It's certainly not as intuitive as some other games can be. As for combat, the gameplay is a little clunky at first, but it does the job for the most part. Not being able to carry bigger weapons on my speeder was a little frustrating. The game clearly wants you to only really use the pistol for the most part, though it does allow you to upgrade it as the game progresses. And enemies aren't really as clever as you might expect. I've been playing on the challenging difficulty, but rarely have I had a problem when facing off with enemies, and most of my deaths have come from my own mistakes, as it is quite easy to run off a ledge, or die from fall damage, or accidentally shoot an explosive barrel that's near you. Now, giving the game a little bit of praise, I'll say that the environments are absolutely beautiful. Even on the low graphics settings, they really do capture the aesthetic and the beauty of the Star Wars universe, and the worlds do feel well populated, giving it a lived-in feel that sometimes can be missing from these large-scale open-world games. The space combat can be quite fun as well. Once again, the controls can be a little cumbersome, but not to the point where it becomes frustrating, and I imagine that a lot of it will clear up once you've got the chance to upgrade your ship later on in the game. Now, there's some really fun elements from just wandering around the map. There are lots of mini games like sabacc and betting on the Favier races. They're nice distractions, and they can be quite rewarding if you know what you're doing. Often with the races, there are data pads lying around that will clue you in on the winners, which can result in some decent profits. Now, the upgrade system is fairly basic. You can upgrade your speeder, your ship, your blaster, and your general cosmetics, but you do need to find the materials throughout the maps as you travel along. So one thing that I do kind of like, though, is the fact that there are some off-limit items that you can buy from merchants if you're in favour with their chosen syndicate. It just makes the game feel like gaining reputation with that syndicate has rewards beyond the base idea of loyalty. And speaking of the syndicates themselves and the reputation system, overall I didn't find it as involved as I would have liked. Your reputation with certain syndicates doesn't appear to affect the story in any major way. It simply plays into how easy it is to access certain areas and items. I really do enjoy when my decisions have an impact on the game rather than just the surface level, so I was kind of expecting a little bit more from this system. Speaking of systems, the GTA style wanted level system is a little strange. It doesn't seem to always be present like in GTA. It's only affecting you if you actually do something against the Empire directly, and in all honesty, it's not that hard to lose the wanted level. I'd say the weirdest element of it is that when you actually hit the top level and death troopers get sent out, you actually have to go to them rather than them coming to you. It's kind of redundant. Now, the characters, they're another big positive for the game. The protagonist, Kay, is fun. She's kind of a clueless trickster who gets way in over her head at times. And Nyx is honestly the most adorable pet that I've ever seen in the game. Certainly for the longest time, I would die for him. Now, there's a decent array of NPC characters and aliens, but they're kind of limited in their species. Mostly you'll find Moncala, Rhodians, Solustans, Quarrens, and Twi'leks, and outside of that, diversity is sparse, which is disappointing because I do love me some good, weird aliens. And it's a shame that in recent years the aliens in Star Wars are either uninspiring or just flat out absent. In terms of the story, it starts off fairly small and simple. Kay is looking for one big score to retire on, but she has to escape her home after a job goes bad, and this leads her on an adventure where she ends up taking on jobs from different syndicates and meeting different people. I've still yet to leave the first major planet, but that should tell you just how much gameplay there is on each world. Now, I come to the biggest and most expected issue the game has had, and that's performance. Whilst it does maintain a solid 60 frames per second, even on my mid-range computer, which is using a GTX 3060, there are a ton of issues surrounding long load times and texture rendering. Now, when I first started the game and got out of the opening mission, it really started to struggle in the open world environment. Textures were failing to load in quickly enough, which meant that I was either falling through the floor or getting stuck waiting outside a door that wouldn't open until everything had loaded in. NPCs wouldn't appear at times and I'd have to leave and come back to be able to talk to them. And as mentioned, the load times are atrocious. When first loading up the game, it took me 5 minutes to bring up my save file. I get that I don't have the most powerful computer in the world, but no game should take that long to load. It extends to the menus as well. Sometimes the map would take minutes to load, or just trying to converse with an NPC would leave us awkwardly staring at each other for at least 30 seconds before the cutscene would load. Now, eventually I was able to fix these issues for the most part by reinstalling the game on a faster SSD, but it is strange, I've never had issues before with the current SSD that I use to keep most of my games on. It's certainly not old or outdated, so this left me a little confused. And I was expecting these kinds of issues, but it is still disappointing to see games so poorly optimised in 2024. I can't think of many AAA titles that don't have these kinds of issues now, so the problem isn't isolated to just Outlaws. So overall, I'd say that in the limited time that I've had to play Outlaws, I found it to be really fun. It does give you a great experience of a lived-in Star Wars world that you actually feel like you're a part of. It's not everything that I wanted it to be, and I'd certainly not recommend paying over the base price for it, but I hope that the performance issues can be patched out quickly, and then additional content will come in that will offer some diversity in gameplay. And when it comes to a recommendation, I'd certainly say if you've got the money spare, it's worth giving it a go, especially if open world games are your thing. It's not the most groundbreaking of games, but it certainly is a hell of a lot of fun, and as I say, hopefully as time goes on, and it starts to add in some additional content, that will just escalate more and more. So once again, this is just an initial review because I have only played a small portion of the game so far, but I've played enough to get a feel on what it's like. And by all means, I will try and do a full-on review once I've completed the game in full. I am streaming it currently, so if you do want to watch me play through, then go and check my channel out. Please do subscribe, look out for the live streams, catch up on the ones that I've already done so far. In the meantime, let me know what you think of the game if you've played it so far. Thank you for watching, and I will see you for the next video.